about who our people were. And she was like, don't you ever let them tell you we're nothing. We're Native American. We're indigenous to these people, to this land. We were here long before the white man came. And she said that they killed us, our ancestors off, and they ran them off. And they passed laws against the natives, like the natives grew corn. They passed laws against natives growing corn. And then she told me about our ancestor who was from Africa. And she's the only identifiable African ancestor that we have. And she called her great-grandmother Leah.
Hello everybody and welcome to Down with the King. Today I'm joined by an amazing guest who was scheduled to have this conversation around a fortnight ago, but unfortunately that had to be cancelled and rescheduled, and today is the rescheduling, and I'm so pleased for that. This person's work excites me so much because she's doing something that I feel needs to be done throughout all black communities, whether diaspora or in Africa, and that is the documenting and the chronicling of our histories, but not from a historical perspective, but from a personal genealogical perspective. This person is an expert genealogist. She used to work for Ancestry.com. They are also an accomplished writer who has written for blackpast.org. They are also a researcher and an activist, and I would say probably the highest accolade that I personally give is they are an adept chronicler of their personal history and how that aligns with our history as black people globally. I am once again so happy to have this person on the channel. So I'd like...
Pleased to meet you.
Pleased to meet you too.
Welcome everyone. I'm more than delighted to be here and to share my story and our story on this network.
Well, you are very welcome, like I said, and I was very excited to have you on. And when it got delayed, I got very worried. So now that it's back and it's happening right now, this is good. I think we're going to have a really amazing conversation. I mean, I'm happy to kind of dive straight in if you are.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay,
yes.
Brilliant. Let's dive straight in then. So, I think that the best question that I can ask you to lay the groundwork and to get the ball rolling is to tell my audience, because I've given my words, but my words ultimately don't matter. I want you to tell our audience, who are you and what is it exactly that you do in this space?
Yes, my name's Anita Wills. I was born and raised in here in the United States, and in Pennsylvania, which is I live in California now, but I was raised back east in a small community. They actually call it the community a village. Okay, and so we were raised with grandparents on my mother's side and my father's side, with aunts and uncles, and a community that we, for a time we felt safe in. And my father was like, he was the head of the household, and he was actually a very brilliant man. He wrote and spoke 7 languages. He was, he worked, but because he was a black man, he could only work, he worked in a steel mill. And he worked in the Veterans Administration. He was a World War II veteran.
Wow.
And when he was in the military, he was told, even though he spoke Russian and German, his services were not needed because he was a black man, even if it would have helped in the war effort. And he was totally disillusioned with them. And in the 50s, we had this McCarthy era, this person who was going around hunting down communists. And they accused my dad of being a communist because he spoke Russian. he also spoke German, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, English. So he had applied for a job with the VA, and they were delaying him because J. Edgar Hoover was investigating him as a suspected member of the Communist Party. Mind you, it was never illegal to be a member of the Communist Party here in America or the Socialist Party. As far as I know, it was not illegal, but he was not a member of the Communist Party. What they were doing was blacklisting people suspected of being members. And when he found out, he went straight to the FBI office in Philadelphia and confronted them and asked them why they were harassing his family and his neighbors, because that's what they were doing. He didn't even know they were investigating. Anyway, and so when we found out about that, or when he found out about that, he became very disillusioned. And he was our teacher. He was the one that told us to not judge people by what, don't condemn, how are you going to condemn a whole nation of people for what some people in the nation are doing? We were told to be afraid of Russians. We would have, they would have days when we had to dive under the desk because the Russians were coming. They would terrify us, talking about the Russians coming. And that's the way that I was raised. On the other hand, my mother was a stay-at-home mother at the time, and I was her oldest daughter, and I was, she was teaching me what, about taking care of the household, cooking, cleaning. She taught me how to sew, and she also told me while I was learning all this about who our people were. And she was like, don't you ever let them tell you we're nothing. We're Native American. We're indigenous to these people, to this land. We were here long before the white man came. And she said that they killed us, our ancestors off, and they ran them off. And they passed laws against the natives, like the natives grew corn. They passed laws against natives growing corn. And then she told me about our ancestor who was from Africa. And she's the only identifiable African ancestor that we have. And she called her great-grandmother Leah. So she's my great-great-grandmother Leah. She was 12 years old. But this was 1830. This was long after the war. It was illegal to sell African slaves in the United States in 1830. She was 12 years old. She said a Dutch ship, the enslavers came and took her and put her on a Dutch ship. Her and her siblings, the children from the village, and put them on a Dutch ship. And so they first went to Bermuda, and they were seasoned I'm saying they're seasoned. She didn't say what happened. And then they were brought to South Carolina, probably after a couple of years, and sold as slaves, as Caribbean slaves. But they actually came from Africa. And Leah was sold to this man. His name was Robert Ruth. He's a white man, and he is my great-great-grandfather. She's my great-great-grandmother.
And she was the only African in your lineage, you said?
That I've been able to trace.
Okay.
Even though, in DNA, African shows up. A lot of Nigerian shows up. But she's my only traceable African ancestor. And, so she endured slavery, having her children taken from her. But at the end, she was brought to Pennsylvania after the end of slavery, and she was able to tell her grandchildren what it was like during slavery. And that was stories that my mother passed to me about her. And they said that there's a Gullah Geechee who were in South Carolina. So she was sold to Hilton Head, South Carolina, where the Gullah Geechee are. Those are West African slaves. And when she was sent to that community, it was like the closest thing to home for her, because everybody on that plantation were Africans and from Africa. And they made it easier for her. Slavery was hard, but being around people, other Africans, she didn't even want to leave after the Civil War because she was with her community. So my great grandfather had to beg her to come, to leave that community and come to Pennsylvania. And so she, so that Gullah Geechee community still exists, to some extent in South Carolina today. But all of those people were Africans, and I'm just, hearing that part of her story, because the other parts of her being whipped, going into the fields, there was a man, she called him Mr. Fields, a white man, that had a whip. And when I see the picture I have of her, she's in her way past her 90s. She was 97 when she died. And you can see how she's sitting forward. And that's how the slave, when you're being whipped and you have scars on your back, and she's sitting forward like that. And she was Muslim. She was Muslim. And my great-grandfather was Christian. So they have some really funny stories about them trying to get her to go to church. And she was, no, I'm Muslim. And they honored her by, she did not want to be buried in the family cemetery. So she has her own special place where she had a Muslim burial. And I like to tell her story because she's just one of the most amazing people that I know of, And at the end, her children were sold away from her, but after slavery, she was able to locate all of her children, all of the children, including my great-grandfather, and, to be reunited with the children. So that's just one of the most amazing stories that I have heard about, slaves. They did not break her. They did not break her. She didn't she would, my mom said she would sit up and say them damn Yankees. I think she was referring to, just the way they were treated by the Europeans, by the white people during the Civil War. I mean, during slavery and even after the Civil War. In other words, she was saying, even after the Civil War, very little changed. So she was, she would say the damn Yankees because they were supposed to change things, and very little changed after the Civil War. So I told her, I wanted to tell her story. And I always do that. And so and when people say, why do you say you're Afro-Indigenous? I say, because I'm honoring my great-great-grandmother, who was from Africa. And, the other part of it, as far as being Native, that is, so much more complicated because they have a skewed history. They blurred the history of what actually happened to the Indians, to the Native American people, to our ancestors. And my mother was telling me stories about our ancestors, and I would say what tribe they belonged to. She said, "Oh, the Mohawk. The Mohawk are, they are more, in Canada and northern New York." So they were a part of what they call the Iroquois Federation. The Iroquois Federation is the ones who had a constitution who was adopted to use in the Constitution of the United States of America. That's the Iroquois Federation. And those are our ancestors. They were coming down. They were tribe whose territory was expanded all the way from Canada into Maryland and Virginia. They were, so most of the tribes here, like, when you talk about the Fulani and saying they're, the Fulani are nomadic. Okay, so most of the native tribes were kind of nomadic. They would move according to where the food was, where the game was, and where the weather, so if it was getting ready to be cold, they might move to a warmer climate. So each tribe had their own territory that they controlled and that they lived in. And so, the point though that I was trying to make when you had the professor on, was that I found out after all this many years of research that my indigenous ancestors were the ones that were enslaved, more so than the Africans. When Columbus came here, even in his writings, he talks about enslaving the Arawak, the Taino. He was enslaving the Native Americans. My grandfather's people, my paternal grandfather's people, were in South Carolina, and they were slaves. But when my brother took the DNA test, then it come back 100% indigenous to Colombia, South America. In other words, he didn't come from Africa. He's indigenous to the Americas. But they were telling us, or writing down, these colonial people who came here and stole the land and stole the lives of the indigenous people, also rewrote the history. And that's all that we had to go by. And very few people that I spoke to wanted to change the narrative. They wanted to live within the narrative because they don't want to upset the status quo. So they don't want to question it. But I want to honor my ancestors. And they were indigenous to the Americas. They were not African slaves. So when people, and it really bothers my spirit when I hear people say, oh, those Africans were selling each other. They were selling each other. And not, if you think about how long it took for them to come, and like the Portuguese would come, and also the Arab traders, they were set up on the shoreline. And they would be there for years. They're sitting there, and what they're doing is diplomacy with whoever's on that shoreline. They're coming as friends. They may be marrying people. They're having children, and all of us, but they know what they're there for. But the people who are in the villages don't know what they're there for because they've never met anyone who would do the things that these people were doing. So maybe after they were there 10, 15, 20, 30 years, there was some Africans who were probably mixed with those Portuguese and those Spanish, who were, the slave traders, who would go and help, enslave, other Africans, but it would not be the Africans from their tribe. It would be this set of people here, and I don't think that it was as many as they said, because again, the Americas were full of people, and they were enslaving them, and they also were redesignating, like my ancestors were redesignated from Indian. Well, in the first place, the native people were going by their tribal name, and they took them from them. So you could not say that you were a member of a tribe. You were just an Indian, okay? And the fact that they called our people Indian, Columbus was going to India and got lost. So he gets lost, and then he's helped by the Arawak in the town, down in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And what does he do to thank them? He enslaves them.
Yeah.
He brutalizes them. Okay, so when they renamed all of the people they met here Indian, because they were headed to India and got lost. Okay, and even India says, well, we're not Indians anyway. That's some Europeans. They're not even. But anyway, so they renamed all of the indigenous people to the Americas one name, Indian. So you lose your tribal name. And then they turn around and rename my ancestors. They called them mulatto. They called them colored. They called them Negro. They called them black. But nowhere in any of the records that I found did they call
Cherokee
them African. I seldom see any records that says that these people are from Africa.
Seminoles.
Even my great-great-grandmother Leah, well, they don't say she's from Africa because it was illegal for her to be sold as an African slave. So they have her down just as black. And the inference is that she was African, So I'm skeptical about the fact that, especially in the interior, that these Africans were selling to, just rounding up their own, tribal members or other tribal members and selling them to the European. Yeah, so it was just the entire way that the story was told to make Europeans look like they're benign and Africans look like, oh, what terrible people they are. They so damn. What were you doing in Africa?
Well, you know what? It's an evolving story, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a story that even in my lifetime, I'm quite a bit younger than you, but even in my lifetime, I'm seeing this story continue to evolve and continue to change, and they're adding things to it now. And, maybe perhaps just after my lifetime, we've seen the renaming of Black Americans to African Americans become there. So you're seeing this evolving tale. We're seeing Africa now bear the brunt of the blame for slavery. That's that's the last 30 years or so. That narrative has really been driven home now.
Yes.
Where Africans are absolutely to blame for this allegedly massive export of humans from from Africa into America. So it's just one of these things where these stories just continue to be fabricated, continue to be exaggerated until it gets to a point where Europeans, white people are completely abdicated of any wrongdoing, and we are in essence blamed for our own position in society, regardless of what the actual true origin of the story was.
Let them tell it.
Yes. And also, what about the Aborigines in Australia? What about that? It's because they were there like over 50,000 years. And they are, they were subjected to colonization too. So what did they do to deserve those people going over there colonizing their lands? Yes. What did they do?
It's really funny, actually. I'm glad you mentioned that because I recently finished. I did a bit of a documentary on the abolition of slavery, and this is something that in England, obviously, the
whole world was black.
In England, it's a big deal,
and that's a fact.
They're making a big deal about the fact that England abolished the slave trade. So everyone from around the world needs to praise the British Empire because they were the ones who stood up and ended this horrendous act of slavery for the world. They made it illegal across the world. So I've done a documentary and I've already exposed all of the financial and all of the spin behind it. But here's the most interesting thing I wanted to raise there. 1833 is when England abolished the slave trade. 1834, they committed one of the most worst genocides in history in Australia.
Yes.
So they want to be praised on this hand for this, but then a year later, they are massacring people, innocent black people, en masse, without any motive. And they want us to believe they did this was for good. This is because we had morals, but we don't talk about this where we, a year later, massacred an entire population of people.
Yes.
So I'm glad you mentioned that.
The Europeans are the new man on earth.
Hawaii did the same thing. Went over there and colonized Hawaii. You know, they were all everywhere
God
they
give
went.
a name.
They have set up their little colonies. They cannot, for some reason, live with indigenous people. They think, well, I don't know what they're thinking, but it appears to me that you think you're entitled to land, and nobody else is entitled to live in peace. But your peace,
God gave Esau Mount Seir.
War and killing us, and that is, that's unacceptable. And the other thing
but
that I want to mention is
he want to take
that
all the black people's land.
Myself, one of my ancestors, who was in Virginia, he came from England, and I believe he was a Moor.
Esau was the only one that was red and hairy all over, like a hairy garment. All the rest of the people was black.
The letter with him. And when he came, his name was Amnadab. He came to Virginia as an indentured servant, but the letter said,
the Most High created the world for the sake of his chosen people.
He is a free man, and he said that
not the new man on earth.
To America when he went to.
We were just cursed by the Lord our God for breaking his covenant.
My ancestors. And he's a dark man.
That's why we at the bottom right
they said
now.
He's not African. So what was he?
But we are getting back on top
and he's not,
where we were in the beginning.
He's a black man.
He's a black man.
He's a black man.
All we have to do is keep God's commandments.
This on my other channel the other day.
Keep all his laws, statutes, and commandments like was supposed to be doing in the beginning.
Discovery they found in the UK, so they found specimens in
Chinaman?
This is much more recent, but
so we can get back in his kingdom.
Well, this is
the last kingdom right here.
One of them they called
Babylon is falling,
and the other one was another one. So they found these two.
The next kingdom is God's everlasting kingdom.
700 AD. And they found them in two separate places, and they both have 20 to 40% recent West African ancestry. So now, I don't even think that's that relevant because you mentioned Cheddar Man already, and every time archaeologists, and this is the thing, they're not telling people this,